different from the previous CAA UKs I have attended, so good plus for you. Unfortunately, I was flown into this first slot from the relative anonymity of the afternoon. So if I'm a little bit out of place, that's partly because I literally just arrived and my lunch is waiting there and I haven't had a cup of tea or anything. And I'm a one person. I have to mention that all this work is done in collaboration with Phil Mills. So he's as much as I responsible for everything which is said and done here, if not more so. And this work I will present definitely involves everything which is in the CAA title, that is archaeology, computing, and statistical methods. But most of all, it's a presentation of a theoretical concept which works as a framework for interpretation of field data, in which the analysis of which GIS is important together with statistical analysis. So I present you ceramiscene. We have been flogging around for a couple of years now, which has born out of Ingold's concept of taskscape I used myself in my prehistoric PhD. Of course, Ingold defined taskscape as a socially constructed space of human activity, understood as having spatial boundaries and delimitations for the purposes of analysis. That's distribution to you and me. And taskscape as well as landscape is to be considered as perpetually in process rather than in static or otherwise immutable state. And I used this in order to see what kind of landscapes people were using during different periods in central Italy. And when it came to the analysis of Roman pottery, I needed a specialist and got Phil Mills. And together we developed taskscape further and suggested that it can be named ceramiscene, or any scene basically, where you stick one group of material into with a fancy Latin or Greek name. But it's a rural or urban landscape formed by manufacture, use and discard of fired clay objects. And this is important because most of the material we collect in the Mediterranean, and what we have also here in UK, is pottery. So analysing and presenting pottery is basically what many of archaeologists do. And in order to analyse pottery, one can use many of several tools of ceramic analysis, which are familiar to most of us, like typological dating, wear and fabric analysis, kind of use of fine wares in quantitative ways, and functional analysis, which can be used in site characterisation. That is basically looking at the different uses of vessels which are involved. And in order to develop ceramicene further, we also involved in the mix the Lynch's theoretical concepts from his 1960 book, The Image of the City, which has been quite popular and fashionable in Roman research. But we basically turned it all upside down. Instead of looking at the city, we looked at the countryside, because basically all his elements are really basic. So you have paths, you have edges, you have districts, you have nodes, and you have landmarks. And all these are basically categories which characterize your usual archaeological landscapes. It has road network in paths, it has edges in different kind of boundaries, it has districts in different distributions, it has nodes in sides and landmarks. You have mountains, you have rivers, you have buildings. So you can characterize all types of landscapes using these really simple concepts. And you can also develop this further using the social theory, which has been attached to Lynch's theories of the zoning of a city. Hillier and Hansen have suggested that all these elements could be presented hierarchically, and this is really easy with Roman network and roads otherwise as well. So these developments actually attach directly to our basic classifying concepts in archaeology when we go about characterizing the landscape. And our site is here in central Italy, north of Rome, about 45 kilometers. The original field work was done in under the umbrella of Tiber Valley project as a continuation of the South Etruria survey. It was directed by Simon Stoddard, but I was a field supervisor in 1999 and 2000, which feels like prehistory now. And the emphasis was in studying pre-Roman settlement. And by this time, GIS had become more or less standard technique, and this benefited this project as well. And I did my PhD on the pre-Roman material. And as a continuation of this project, there was the analytic phase, the romanization of a Faliscan town, which basically analyzed the Roman pottery, which was coded in 2008. And here you have the area covered in the surveys. It should be 230, not one. Sorry about that, different versions of representation around. Here you have the landscape, so you see there are indeed very deep river valleys there, and all the dots on Google or pins on Google Map are different sites we found. And just to give you an idea of how it looks like around there, so there is a large canyon next to a modern town. And these are the Roman sites we defined in the field and presented in GIS. And these sites could be defined as nodes of this research, whereas these canyon-like river valleys could be presented as edges, and there was clear suburban kind of spread outside the town, so there was suburban area apart from rural area. There you can define main Roman roads separate from non-paved secondary roads, and you can define certain landmarks, the kind of nodes which are not visited, which only direct your moving around the landscape. And this is the date range of Roman pottery, which is the data set we have used in this project. It doesn't really differ from any central Italian data range. It has the peak in around Augustan period, and then it goes downhill with occasional peak kind of increases in settlement during the late antique. And then the traditional distribution maps of the nodes. Here is the 2nd century BC, the peak of the settlement when you have most site type in function. Then the slight, we move towards slight decline towards the 3rd century AD, and the strengthening of Roman villas in the territory, and the dichotomy between the villas and the urban center, which is not visible from this distribution map during the late antiquity. And these represent the material. It's basically oxidized cooking pottery with little fine ware, some amphoras, some pre-Roman material, and some white wares. And but it gets more interesting when one starts to look at different wares by site type, and clearly certain pottery wares are index finds for certain types of sites. You have sigillata mostly in villa sites or near the urban center. Mortaria is very rare, extremely rare, and found only from urban context, where you can suggest there were some military presence, and dolia were only found from farms. So you can use wares as kind of a tool to decide the function of your site. Then presenting the wares in the landscape, you use GIS, and then you can see where the large villas lie and the more special sites like M2/1, which seems to be some kind of ritual site. And here the different functions of pottery vessels or diagnostic pieces are presented, and again the suburban area and large villas together with the building, which mostly is represented by this one exceptional ritual site. They show most variability, which again can be used as index of site type, and represented as GIS maps, which can be used in interpreting the landscape. And again, fine ware and sigillata are used as indicators of certain types of sites, confirming what was decided during the initial analysis, and kind of on the basis of the size of the sites. And this is the date distribution of amphora. I talk a little bit at this latter part of the talk. You must notice that the date distribution of amphora is totally different from the general distribution of material. And when other settlements slump, the amphora use actually goes up, which suggests that certain parts of Roman economy were functioning quite well indeed. And then kind of more analysis on the basis of different fabrics of the oxidized wares. I have circled two wares, but do notice the O51, which is the late Roman one, which seems to bypass the urban centre totally and suggests that suggests the strength of the villas during that time, because all these sites are villa sites where you have this fabric on this distribution map. So you can use your data in order to see different supply networks. And on the basis of all Roman data, we make certain interpretation of different districts. This is based basically on the natural landscape and the richness of the finds and the location of different important villa sites together with the track of the Via Amerina, which is the major Roman route in this area. But from this definition of districts, which was partly ad hoc, we wanted to go further. And as an example, we took totally for other reasons than research interest, the interesting period we studied. We chose late antique because that was one of the conferences we were heading to. We have to do the Republican period, which is really supposed to be really interesting in this area, kind of doing the finer analysis of material. When we look at boundaries, I just wanted to visualize the importance of these river valleys, these canyons, in separating different sides of the territory of Nepi, how they had a crucial effect in kind of circling certain areas and making them natural districts and allowing and disallowing movement between places in the landscape. Naturally, one can use Thiessen polygon as a theoretical tool in order to define where the territory of the urban centre itself may or may not have been lying, and use zoning, kind of the standard GIS distance classification tool in order to look at the distance from certain features like the centre itself when we are looking at the rural hinterland. Okay, and first in defining boundaries, this is urban development. We are interested in amphorae because they seem to stay in the villa site instead of spreading out from there. So they seem to have poor permeability. So we have done some experiments with interpolation in order to visualize how where you have the peaks and where you have lacunae, and then look at the distribution of villas at certain periods. But most of all for late antique, we have looked at 3 different pottery types: African red slip, North African amphorae, and North African coarsewares, and looked at the correlations between different geographic landscape attributes and the finding a certain pottery type in the field units. And it turns out that we have 3 different set of correlations, 3 different distributions. So we have African red slips, which basically correlates with distance, but so that most pottery is found near the center itself. Then when we look at a North African amphorae, its distribution kind of is connected with flatter areas and areas which open to certain direction. In this case, it should be southeast. Sorry about that mishap. And also there is a negative correlation between distance between the distribution of this pottery ware type and the distance from Nepi, which again suggests that a lot of pottery, a lot of amphorae is found near a city itself. That shows you that part of the population was concentrated to the center, and the other part was going out to the larger villas in the landscape. Then North African coarsewares has a totally different distribution, and these finds are so rare. It's kind of a little borderline to use them in this way, but they kind of seem to be correlated with curvature and suggest locations on convex hillocks or slopes. And when one kind of combines all these three different, let's say, late Roman markers and looks how the landscape features correlate with them, again, it's kind of, you get basically your standard Roman location, but it's at least shown that it's backed up by the evidence. So you have most late Roman pottery from flatlands opening to southeast near the city of Nepi itself. And then, just as a footnote, the Roman road network doesn't seem to have any effect whatsoever. It was omnipresent and used by everybody still during the late periods. So that was our presentation. We suggest that ceramicene allows one to integrate the both methodological and theoretical sides of the research and use the material assemblages to the full in interpretation. And I hope I have shown somehow that we can define a late Roman ceramicene with three different distribution patterns, which as a whole define a certain kind of quite normal Roman ceramic landscape. We have a lot of people to thank for the original research and the pottery analysis, and that was it for the first piece.